Da 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes to get those notifications out. In the meantime, if you've never been into one of my lives before, hi, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside. Today was a little bit of both. Grateful for that. But it has been a kind of insightful kind of week that I'm having this week. And yesterday we had this word clarity. And right after my live show, what did I do? I went and deleted my podcast, and it wasn't available to anybody else, and it was instinctual, and it was without me even going in and taking the lesson myself. I get it. Sometimes that we have to be redirected in our understandings when we express ourselves in a way that makes something that might be a possibility for one person and non-factual for another, and yet we put it out there like it's for absolutely everybody. And in that moment of clarity, right, I knew to hit that delete button. Today, it was my intent to get into the topic, to make a few notes, to delve into my own understandings, my own experiences in my own life. And really, before I came in tonight, have some serious clarity in what I was going to share. But I don't know. I totally zonked out this afternoon. My energy levels were zero. I can always tell because I have this tendency to kind of hold on to things because I'm bumping into stuff. When I went out today for a little bit of walk, I felt I was a little bit spacey and kind of wobbly on my feet. Kind of wanted to go to have a nap this afternoon, but I'm not a big napper. I probably once a year when I come home from my camping trips that I will be exhausted and I'll lay down for an hour or two, but it's kind of light. It's just kind of that relaxation and recouping and right, feeling refreshed again in a way rather than just carrying on with the heavy and making the day kind of useless in a way because you're not into it. I came home from my walk and I came home, and right away I had some dinner and I sat here, and within a few minutes I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go lay down. And I'm not ill in any way, right? But I really felt like I needed a nap. And being considerate to myself, making myself that priority, I knew instantly, right, that it was something that I needed to do, especially with only an hour or two earlier having that exact same feeling that I needed to lay down and just, even if I was just going to lay there, right? And I laid down, and I would have to say within 3 or 4 minutes, I was out. My intent was just to lay down for an hour or so, get up, make myself a cup of coffee, and then go into this topic of clarity so that I could have a little bit more clarity when I came into my live today. So we're just going to still fly by my seat of my pants, right? Understanding things work out the way they do for a reason. And there was a reason possibly in that. And this is what I was thinking, that, something that is a reality for somebody, something that's a truth for one person isn't necessarily a truth for another. I think, the plan is that we're going to be on better pages at some point, and whether that is in a few decades from now, a few lifetimes from now, maybe it's going to be thousands and thousands of years, right? You guys who've been hanging out with me for any length of time, I'm a realist. And that's part of the reason too, is because when you do have clarity, it is a truth, right? It is a truth. But I can't expect that it's going to be the truth for everybody, because each one of us have different beliefs, different perspectives. And that's the idea of these cards, right? When I come in and I grab a card for us, and again, if you haven't hung out with me, these are 54 powerful words, just powerful words, right? But each one of these powerful words, when I pull it up in consideration to the experiences that I'm having during the day, maybe my problems, right? We all have problems and issues, sometimes from my own personal beliefs, or in that butting head in my own experiences where I do get little tidbits of clarity, right? But again, that clarity that I have for myself, I understand that in this moment, it's not clarity for everybody, because we're all growing up with different perspectives. And those perspectives necessarily are not ours. I know for myself, right? I was trained in my experience, in my family, each one of us held our own space. And my family lived on archetypes, and we all, right, again, all had our place in that. And so a lot of my beliefs, and for the reason that it's just taking me so long to come into that magnificent clarity that I know is there, because it's constantly being revealed to me. And when I'm saying it's revealed to me, it's being presented to me, but it's in the way it hits, it's in the way it feels, right? So I only had an hour before my live show tonight to be able to go into the topic of clarity. The first thing I wanted to do, and you guys know that yesterday when I came in, we had the word freedom, right? And let me find that card right on the top. And on my card here, it says freedom is the choice to dictate for ourselves. But how can we do that without the clarity? That's evolution, because it's in time and space that we become more clear in our beliefs, right? Our understandings. And in those understandings, we have to understand that there are understandings and not everybody else's understanding. So, in clarity, I want to make sure that everybody understands that when I come into my lives, I let go and I let it flow. Right? And I can already feel that it feels better tonight. It's hitting better tonight for at least myself than it did yesterday. So no matter what, I'm not deleting this one, but we're going to cover this topic of freedom, but combining it with the word clarity, right? Because we don't have the capability to have good understandings, right? It's just like the discoveries in medicine, in the 1500s, they were bloodletting, right? They believed in it. And when a king got sick, they would, right? stuff these tubes into them, and they would just let their poisonous, what they thought, their poisonous blood drip out of them. And, right? Did that serve anybody? Probably not. It might not have even served the world in the way that it was supposed to, because without proper clarity and being only human, right? And having different perspectives and trusting people who really feel that their perspectives are right, we hand over our trust. We hand over that power to make good decisions for ourselves without sitting in it and, right, recognizing for ourselves where we might be getting it wrong and where we might be getting it right. Another example, is in the 17 and 1800s. There was a great amount of death in new mothers, right, when they had their babies, and lots of times women would not survive their births, right? It took a long time, and everybody was blaming everybody else, right? Blaming the patients, blaming the environment, but nobody was taking responsibility for themselves until one doctor recognized that, the people who were delivering these babies were actually coming out of doing autopsies and not washing their hands, right? And in proper clarity, right? And in our evolution of getting better at understanding and getting the right information, that we get to be better humans, right? We get to better understand that we are not the be all to end all, that each one of us, right, gets to dictate for ourselves in our own choices, but, right, without delving in and sitting in and going in, clarity might miss the mark and we might cause harm. Those doctors who were doing autopsies started washing their hands and disinfecting their hands before they started delivering babies, and the death rate crashed to the ground. And in that recognition, in that clarity, we knew and started to understand about bacteria and germs. And in understanding and having that clarity, our professions of medicine and well being has actually intensified in a way that not only do the doctors have clarity, but we ourselves as a whole, as a world, has clarity, right? Like going into the bathroom and seeing the sanitizer dispensers on the wall. Like we understand how important it is to keep the germs off our hands, right? Your mom comes to visit the new baby, right? She's running off to the washroom with a bar of soap and, right? And she's scrubbing because she knows in her own clarity now, clarity that she is actually brought into herself by good influence, by the evidence, right? And lots of times we don't take the fact that we need to see, feel, experience the evidence for ourselves before we'll take on somebody else's perspective. For myself, we're going to go back into my earlier years. I wasn't going to, but, I think it is important in knowing that, I was not my own person. And as children, right, very few of us are brought up to make our own decisions. I did have a father, and in his own dynamic ideas and perspectives, decided to give his children free choice. But that free choice was not for our freedom, because that free choice was surrounded by influence and manipulation. And those appetizer platters of choices were limited in that, very limited. And I didn't have the right understandings. But one thing I did know in clarity was the difference between right and wrong, right? I might not have seen the full picture of it all, but I did understand right and wrong. And having that experience of the wrong and being a child and not having free choice in that influence, right? That these were perspectives that became a part of me, became a part of my sisters, right? And, I didn't have children, but if I had children, it would have become, right, truths for my children, because we, in epigenetics, this is what we do. We pass what we understand, we pass what we know, we pass our religion, we pass our political ideas, right? But they're not always right, because they're just passed down and we are devouring them as truths. Okay, so first off, let's go into this word. Oh my goodness. Okay, I have to pull it up again because I got rid of it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at clarity in relationship to freedom, because, right, there is no freedom without clarity. Okay, so this is what Gemini says about this, the AI overview. Okay, being clarity means being clear and easy to understand, free from confusion, applying to communication, perception, seeing through things, right? Thought, which is a clear mental grasp of things, right? Or physical things, like a glass of water, right? It signifies a lack of ambiguity, allowing for easy perception or understanding, and can refer to mental insight, transparent objects, or precise audio visual clarity. The evidence for ourselves, right? And in technology, even when you look at the technology of things, that could be clarity too, because it works, right? In technology, right? That we get to understand that it works. It's like first thing that came to my mind is the Nintendo game, right? We in technology, right? People go in and they know the Nintendo game, how it works, what the idea of the games are, and maybe that wasn't such a good analogy, but it was the first thing that did come to my mind, right? But as a whole, we all know, right, how these video game systems work. Not for myself, because that's not part of my interest. That's not part of my focal points. It never has been. My family, especially my dad loved technology. He was in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. He had those 7-foot Panasonic, right? The Zenith speakers, big stereo systems. And when the video machines came out, the PlayStations, they would come out, Gemini, Atari at that time, right? He was right into that, and my whole family was too, right? So it's in that understanding that this is the way that it works. Did we have the insight to understand that right? That 20, 30, 40 years from that point, we were going to be in the age of AI learning, and we would be asked to accept, right, the truth of things that we didn't understand. It's in those steps that we get to truly understand what clarity means, right? Because if a lot of these things were explained to us, right, what's going on in this day and age right now, you can pretty much guaranteed it would have been a very different story for me. I believe this. In my perspective, I believe that we come back with the same groups lifetime after lifetime, right? Cindy's never coming back, but there are parts of me that I feel that are so ancient and is so integral is the word I'm looking for. It's an important part of the recipe of creation, just like every single one of us, whether we believe it or not. But I'm not talking in respect to that. It was just popped into my mind again. So I just let that out. But let's go back into this, right? In communication and in thought, easy to understand, right? Using simple words, avoiding jargon, focusing on core, right? And there we go. That's why it wasn't important, because it wasn't a core point, and it kind of adds to what, right? Because that's Cindy's perspective, right? That adds to clarity, and it becomes unclear, right? Like a cloudy glass of water, right? The mental grasp, a clear understanding of goals, values, or a situation, like a moment of clarity. You know, when I first started on YouTube, I wanted to be a YouTube superstar. I wanted to be like Logan Paul. I wanted to be huge. I don't know what was going on. But in the moment, that's the way I felt. And I was convinced that if I applied myself, that that's the way it was going to be. That's how it was going to work out for myself. That was not only my perspective, that was my determined goal. But I had no clarity, no understanding, right? That the difference of span from where I started to where I am now is so different. And the clarity that I have now might have just put me on a path to better understanding, because, in that dynamic life that I had created for myself, in those limited, influenced, manipulated, right? Uh, Ideas that I had, they were only ideas. They weren't clarity. And it was only in my own determination to search out answers. But that's the idea. When we search out answers, we're searching out clarity, right? And again, it's clarity for ourselves and not necessarily clarity for everybody. And I believe, in my perspective, clarity at this moment, but maybe in the end game, right? Maybe in that far reach into the future where there is no clarity for any of us, right? That in the moment I have the right clarity for the space that I'm sitting in right this moment. Hello, Hannah. Hello, Eugene. Thank you so much for the thumbs up. I so appreciate it. I'm having a good day. I hope you're having amazing day too. Um I look good and happy, my friend. Oh my goodness. I appreciate that you say that. I'm not necessarily exuberant in the moment because I've only been awake for an hour or so. I'm kind of still a little bit spacey in that. And I recently, right, lost a cat, and I don't know. I've been having a pretty difficult time in, see, here I go again. I shouldn't have even mentioned her in the passing of my cat. And again, looking for clarity in that, I have to look into my own emotions and my own understanding of why I'm having such a hard time this time. It's not like she was my first cat, but I always seem to have been able to move on, you know, fairly quickly, in my departure from those friends, right? Because these are our pets are our friends. They're are the ones that don't judge us in any moment. And so I've been having a pretty tough time in the past month with that. But at the same time, right, I'm still moving forward. And that's the idea, that we should be able to run through difficult spells, difficult moments of unclarity, right? Because I don't have the clarity in itself to really understand why I'm still feeling the way I do, right? I loved her, but I loved all my cats, right? Okay, that'll fit in there somewhere, I'm sure, right? Okay. So I found it really, really interesting that, that we have ideas, right, of how we're supposed to feel about things, right? But we don't always necessarily feel that way. And when we don't feel the same way as our parents or our siblings or our peers, or our in our workplaces, that we tend to beat ourselves up in that. And sometimes, and I've done this so much, it's part of people pleasing, right? And again, without that clarity and understanding of what people pleasing is really all about, right? I would still be continuing in that line of understanding, right? There is no question in that. I would have ended up, you know, being a narcissist partner, and not putting any disrespect to the narcissist, because that's the way they end up the way they do, is because they don't get that respect. And so they take, right? Because they feel it's not going to be freely freely given, right? And I believe that's what kind of went wrong in my own family. Again, I'm attributing it, right? Being a realist, I'm attributing it to evolution, in that epigenetics, in those understandings that, that we're passing clarity of our own moment of understanding down to the next generation. And right, we're gobbling it up as truth. And not having those right answers, right, and having that understanding, right, that clarity, that I didn't matter unless I was serving somebody else, unless I was holding somebody else's problems or taking the blame for somebody else, right? That I would have never had a chance. But the idea is in free choice. And that doesn't mean that free choice to carry on with false understandings, right? Understandings out of from our parents, right? Just out of respect sometimes, or that understanding from your friends who, right, try to make you small in the moment so that maybe they can feel a little bit better, or find yourself in a situation in a workplace where you feel that, if you don't people please, if you don't put your beliefs, your understandings to the side and pick up on somebody else's truth, somebody else's version of clarity, that maybe you wouldn't have a job. Maybe you would be ousted, right? Maybe you would be ghosted in that community that, right, that you give 8 hours a day to, and that you do maybe love aspects of that job, but it's expecting you to be lesser than what you are. And these are cults, right? These are the ones that say, do as I say, right? Not necessarily what I do, but at the very least, right? Understanding what I say is the truth. What I say is the way that it is. And then we end up influencing, right? Not necessarily out of ill intent, but only because that's the way we learned. That's the information that was given to us. That's how we live. That's how we move. That's how we understand. And then who suffers, right? Also, the next generation, because the past generation didn't have clarity and wasn't able to possibly get to where they were supposed to be too in their own lives. I woke up to some of these ideas, right, later in life. And I was well into my 50s before I could, well, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say it probably started in my 40s without any understandings, right? Without having that connection with those other parts of me, that somehow in that small seepage that I was able to have a little bit better clarity, especially, in when I started to go off camping and started going off and having small adventures by myself without other people, right? Because being the people pleaser that I would be doing stuff to entertain others, to make other people feel comfortable, to make them feel better about themselves. And in the end, right, that's a lot to hold on to for any one of us, right? Just look at the mother's job in the house, their job outside, work 8 hours a day, come home, do all the laundry, feed, wash, take care of the kids, and maybe, possibly, and in this day and age, quite likely, not have a male figure in the house. And that's another idea if we talk about clarity, is to better understand where we went wrong in that partnership that is meant to be, in order so that the next generations can grow up healthy, right? And free choice is a good thing, but not with the influence, not with the manipulation, right? That follow me. And I follow, I definitely follow, right? And I definitely sit in different perspectives, right? I love going into different religious ideas, right? I'm not a big politics person, right? But I do look out at people who are kind of moving in the same direction I do and looking at what they contribute, their understandings, their feelings, right? Their perspectives, and then be able by my own free choice, right? Because I'm searching out clarity now. I'm not searching out, you know, friendships. And because I understand for myself now through my own experiences of going off on my own adventures and spending so much time on my own and doing things that I love rather than we are all caregivers. We should all be caregivers for each other. So don't get me wrong in that, in the idea that because we're people pleasers, we shouldn't care and give for others. We right? We most certainly should, but there is a limit to that, and there is um um a point where it becomes too much and it becomes abusive in that. And, if you know anything about me, I come from a dynamic family. And in those extremes and in having free choice and having that free, and having been sheep herded in the influence and the manipulation with good intent and with ill intent, that I was able to see the difference between right and wrong. And even back then, as a small child, as a teenager, I was able to have a little bit of clarity. And that's the idea, these small steps, right? You guys hang out with me. You guys know I believe in baby steps, but that's how it works because those baby steps are happening, right? They're happening without, for the most part, us even understanding. Like I said, I probably started all this in my 40s and probably attributed it to menopause or something, but I didn't have the understandings that I have now. I didn't have the clarity that I have now. But that's because I didn't have, in truth, uh, free choice. I only had the perception of free choice, and that perception was not mine, right? That people pleasing so that I don't get in trouble, right? That people pleasing so that I can keep my job. That people pleasing so I can keep unhealthy relationships in my life because I felt that, right? Without relationships, I was a zero. I was a loser. I didn't matter. I wasn't even worth the air that I was taking into my lungs. And that's the truth. And lots of people grow up that way. And it causes so many problems that it makes people not want to be around to see what's coming next, right? Each one of us has that opportunity to search out clarity. I did it. I stuck with it too, not even understanding. And it's not like I didn't make mistakes and I didn't come close into falling into traps that I right I hurt relationships in that because I took other people's perspectives as truth. And in the moment, right, it could be true. But in the future, right, I don't believe that those relationships came into my life for any other reason for except to have that free choice to rub at each other, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's like sandpaper, so that we can build resilience, so that we can better have the insight to understand what's right and what's wrong, and then to actually see that even in my uniqueness, right? That everybody else had that uniqueness to themselves too, right? So, how can I expect anybody to feel, think, or move or understand the way that I do, right? We're not even close to being on the same page. There are just too much separation in the moment, but the idea is to feel our own way. And when you start waking up to these ideas, right? I wanted to jump into it right away. But if I had, I would have done detrimental damage to myself, my family. And when I say to myself not to understand some of these aspects like understanding, freedom, clarity, forgiveness, courage, right? That without these lessons, I'll always find myself being snagged by somebody else's idea of what I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to contribute, and who I'm supposed to give that to, when in all actuality, right? Priority number one is giving to ourselves. Okay, you guys, I think I'm going to leave it there now before I flow off into those aspects that might not contribute to the conversation, but it's true. And I'm going to leave this, right, because I'm going to remember this when I say freedom is the choice to dictate for ourselves. I will be able to expand on that, because we cannot dictate for ourselves without proper clarity. And clarity is about paying attention. It's about feeling out the people who we are taking advice from, who we're absorbing perspectives of, right? I always thought that I was super, super obese right up until, well, when I left high school. I look at those pictures of myself, you know, in those years, and I feel awful for that teenager, because she was not in the state of reality that actually was true, right? I was made to feel that way, and it was to help others feel better about them, feel about themselves, right? I might have been a little bit of a lucky charm. I believe that. And, I am a shiner. I really am. I really am a shiner. But I am not shining on individual ideas anymore. I am shining on individuals, right? And that is a free choice that I'm making in the moment, because I have that clarity that sometimes, right, that you have to shine on a movement rather than shining in a group, because there's just so many perspectives in that. And if you are highly sensitive, if you're an empathic anyway, it is your tendency to smooth the rough spots, right? To make everybody feel better, to make everybody feel comfortable. And that's where we lose that true understanding, right? And that clarity for ourselves. Okay, you guys. Thank you so much, everybody. Oh, Hannah, you're sweet. Thank you so much. Hannah says, keep being you, right? But the thing is, keep being me. Me is always changing, right? The more I understand, the more freer I feel, and the more freer I feel, I feel more like I can be myself, that I can be comfortable in what I do, how I feel, what I bring to the table. Okay, you guys, that's my good cheer. You have a great night, and I'll be back tomorrow. Everybody, aw, thank you. Thank you. You're so sweet. Everybody, thank you so much for coming into my life. We'll see you tomorrow.